Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the Powerhouse Perspective, empowering leaders for business breakthroughs. For those who have joined us before, I'm Scott Medeiros, the president of HelmWise. This is Chandler Rose, the CEO of the Rosewood family of companies. And it's been a little bit of time since our last podcast. We've been doing a lot of things here at HelmWise, as well as with the family of companies of Rosewood. And so, Chandler, you've been on the road quite a bit. It's good to have you back. You're probably feeling a bit jet lagged. And I think you're going to get on a plane again this afternoon to go out and visit some more clients.
It is the time of year. Occasionally when you're in business, especially when you do multi-state and nationwide business, the plane is where you spend too much time on the road is too much time. So I have been to coast, meetings in California, Texas, Florida, back to Texas today. And so it's a little interesting for the family when you spend, I think I have 10 days in office in 5 or 6 weeks.
Right.
And so, trying to get the family involved much as we can so I can see my young kids. And that's what you have to do sometimes to get the business moving forward or to push the deal along. And that's just part of being in charge, being the leader.
Part about being a captain.
It is.
Exactly right. Luckily for me, my travel's been local. A couple of events this week and a couple upcoming week as well. We've got some more. So just to bring everyone back up to speed from where we were last time, in our last podcast number 7, we talked about O.A.R, Orient, Align, and Reckoning. And during that second stage, the Align stage of O.A.R, we talked about evaluating whether or not the captain, the ship, and the crew are ready for the journey they're about to go on. So in our previous podcast, we talked quite a bit about the captain, the qualities of a captain, ensuring that they are humble, the fact that they have a stewardship mentality, that they embrace sacrifice and they embrace legacy. Today in this podcast, I want to talk a little about the crew, right? What kind of capabilities does the crew need? How does the captain select the crew? How do we look at their capabilities and their skills to ensure they're right for the journey? So let's talk a little bit about the crew today.
Sounds good.
All right. One of the things that I've gone back and forth with through all of my reading is, do you define the role first, what you need the crew member for, and then find the crew member? Or do you get the right crew member mentality-wise, values-wise, and then find the seat to put them in? So Jim Collins in Good to Great will talk about getting the right people on the bus. And then once the people are on the bus, putting them in the right seat. What's been your experience here at Rosewood about either finding the person first, putting them in the seat, or define the seat first and then finding the person?
Well, certainly it's a natural conflict, I believe, for you, Scott, because coming from the military, you have a truly captive audience.
Yes, it's
to
true.
Put it that way.
That's
so
true.
You can define the scope of work. You can do the desktop procedures, and you can rotate through individuals and then wash them out if they do not fit the seat that you. So it is much more of a machine. And of course, it needs to be in a time of war. You need a machine that performs, and the seats can be replaced because you don't have certainty that people will be back. Business is quite different. People are not signed up for 4 years or for however long they're signed up, and so they have the ability to leave. We don't own them. We don't get to fully break them down and build them up. We receive them how they are. Certainly, we'll talk a little bit about interview process to try to bring in the right cadre of people to kind of choose from. But we have been much more successful in kind of a hybrid, which is really the best way. Accountability chart more than really fully defining a role. The general responsibilities of the seats we want to have at a certain revenue and a certain volume of business. And then finding the people that best fit those seats. And it may not be what they were interviewed or hired for. And so you have to be realistic. I think Collins has that exactly correct on the right seat on the bus. Unfortunate reality is occasionally they don't belong on the bus, but more than likely, if you hired properly, you align with values, they show the effort and consistency, you can find a spot for them. Of course, economy and revenue dictate a little bit of that flexibility, but overall, I think the general rule is hire the right people, have a seat in mind. The reality is, until you truly stress them, test them out in that seat, we have moved a lot of leaders to different companies, different seats, lower level employees to different companies and different responsibilities. Main characteristic being, do they embrace the values and what we're trying to achieve, our why? And if they do that, then we're going to work hard to give them some grace through generosity, we call it, and put some effort into them to train them and get them in the right seat where they belong and so they can flourish and be prosperous.
Right. So as you were going through that, it reminded me of just an engagement I was on yesterday, and I was working with a leadership team. We were doing some of the assessments, Working Genius with Maxwell Disc. And what's unique about that particular team is that they were very well skilled into what the mission of the organization is. However, because the mission is one in which it's a very serving sort of organization, you start to attract the very same people. And I think that there's always a danger that you start hiring people just like you. And therefore you start not getting that diversity of thought. I think here at Rosewood, we've done a great job in getting a lot of diverse opinions. The fact that I'm here in a military mentality really is counter to what the team usually was expecting. So as we're selecting people as a leader, how do you keep that bias away, right? It takes a lot of self-awareness. And so you're not automatically being attracted to those who act and speak and think like you, because we need that diversity of thought.
I think that some arrogance, some fear, some belief that as a leader it will be easier to get people who think and act like you do because you can predict what they're going to do and how they're going to react, and they're going to give you the feedback in the way that you want to receive it. But I think the fear of that is one that certainly I can't take credit for from my mom is, harmony is the enemy of innovation. And so when you seek that full harmony and everyone does as you want, innovation goes down. The second thing is if you don't have a very open dialogue with your team and you don't have diversity of thought and you're heading in the wrong direction, you may all be rowing together. But as I like to say, you just row right off the waterfall.
Right.
And so,
yeah,
you need some people, and that does take humility. It takes being willing to, when you talk of sacrifice, it's not just sacrifice of time. We've spoken a little bit about that. It's also a sacrifice of your thoughts and ideas. And a lot of people do not want, they think they have it figured out. They do not want a new hire or a lower level employee to come to them and point out another way to approach a problem. Not necessarily because they have some intentional bias, I think. I believe that just the kind of Cialdini's consistency bias, the need to have predictability
right.
overrides the reality of, which has become a politically charged, frankly, terminology of diversity. So diversity in the right sense, socioeconomic, certainly, demographics, certainly backgrounds of race and different, they bring a lot of richness, but it still must be unified against performance and values and the purpose that you're pursuing in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can bring up perspectives that you may or may not have, and they can bring a different facet is a good way I think we use occasionally is, you think of a diamond with a lot of facets. Each person sees it slightly different. It's still a diamond, but you don't see it at all the same way as someone else. And so I think that it's got to be intentional. Your natural inclination is certainly to take what you think is a smoother, easier route. So you must intentionally decide that I want diverse opinions in the room. I'm going to give them a chance to speak. I'm going to truly have a discussion with them about what is valuable and what's not so that they learn. That is part of investing in your people. And I think that's a lot of work. Most people rather think they see the problem, get a solution, and move on, as opposed to spend the time exploring what is the best solution. So.
Right. And it brings again to mind, Patrick Lencioni, right? Patrick talks about in the 5 dysfunctions of team, how one of the greatest dysfunctions, aside from trust, which is the baseline, is that fear of conflict, right? And you mentioned the harmony aspect of things. And, we as leaders, the leaders of your ship, you've got to kind of welcome conflict. If you're trying to keep the crew under control all the time, then you're not going to get that diversity of thought. They're not going to challenge. They're not going to say, hey, sir, I think we're going to go onto the rocks, right? Because they're afraid. You're ruling by fear. And conflict, I think, is something that we naturally shy away from because we're not good at dealing with it, first of all. But as a true hard captain of a ship who's truly trying to achieve your just cause, your why, you've got to offer or welcome those differing opinions. Because I know we've had very heated debates, but they've just been that. They've been a debate of viewpoints, coming to that conclusion, argue it out, but then when you leave the room, everyone is aligned. Going back to O.A.R, Orient, align, and reckon.
I think that, we talk about truth. We believe there is a certain truth that is absolute, but there are different variations of it. So I heard a gentleman talking about a mountain that was behind his house, and at one point it was worshipped as where the gods were. Another point it was mined for the minerals that are there. Another point it was, for artists and people to look at it. All those are truly what the mountain is. But unless you all think about it and you all have a discussion, you don't realize all the other variations of that exact item. And that's a concrete example of something that is viewed very differently by, it's just three groups of people over time that had viewed this mountain as something different. And so all of them being accurate. And so it is viewed as quicker, and it may be quicker not to run through those debates,
Right.
but it's risky. And so you had better hope that you have the right target and you're going in the right direction, and everyone that's exactly like you falls in line and it hits the bullseye. Odds are there'll be a lot of curves in the road before you get there, and more than likely, unless you're the unicorn, you're going to miss and potentially miss catastrophically. I think if you have a group, you may still miss, but if you take a diverse opinion, you're able to correct course and you won't be a catastrophic failure. So fail fast is a terminology, obviously, in business, and a lot of the tech folks like it. I do think that's accurate because I see some people who spend all their time trying to calculate the one right answer. And in reality, they could have got a group in, tried something, failed, restarted, tried it again, and hit the target by the time you get your one perfect shot, which is, again, another Collins reference that he talks about before you launch the cannonballs. Shoot
That's right. Musket balls
first.
Yeah, exactly right.
So get those shots out there. Take that discussion back to the table. How did it go when we tried to solve it this way? Is it moving the direction we want it to move? Is it going to be successful in our opinion? And then go again. And so we're going to fail. So diversity is a huge way to overcome catastrophic failure, I'd say.
Yeah, agreed. And so we've even just a short period of time, we've talked a lot of different facets, going back to your diamond analogy. And, and often we think about really good things. And we're like, oh, the next hire, we're going to do this, or the next team member that I'm going to bring on board, I want to ensure has these qualities and these traits. But often, if we don't have a system that we're trying to follow, you can forget about some of the things, or you're only focused on the one thing that's currently defined, and you miss some of the other deeper, perhaps wider aspects of hiring. I know that here at Rosewood, we kind of take a version of Traction by Gino Wickman, the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and we have the accountability chart, and we have the GWC, and we have the People Analyzer. The accountability chart's all about setting up those roles and responsibilities for the organization, kind of going back to the right seat definition. But then when you come to the People Analyzer, it's really trying to ensure that that person you're bringing onto your ship has the right values, and using those deliberately to ensure that the person is going to be a fit culturally for the organization. And then finally, we've taken the GWC, the get it, want it, capacity to do it, and expanded and add some more qualities to it. And but going through that system, I think, allows us to ask the right questions at the right time, going back to some of our core disciplines within the Helmwise methodology. But others don't do that. Sometimes they go into the interview, they go in, they have a conversation, but it isn't very deliberate. And therefore, they sometimes fall back into the biases. What's been your opinion of our use of the GWC and the People Analyzer in getting good people on the ship here at Rosewood?
I think that to me, the conflict arises really in the whole process is the last part of that right question, right time, right depth.
Yes.
And so I think it's more productive to debate the right depth because I see a lot of people that, again, they want the right answer and the perfect person. They go so in depth with the assumption the business is going to stay the same. And so even if I knock it all out of the park, one, it probably won't stay the same. Two, you don't really know how people are going to act until stress hits them. Until, I love the Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And so that is realistic. And again, it is a great spot of really where the juxtaposition between Scott and myself with the military background is you see, and everyone loves watching the Hell Week and the Navy SEAL stuff. but that's the most controlled environment you could possibly get
Yeah.
to pick a human being. So they've already been in. A lot of them already been in special forces, so they've already passed. They have a lot of assessments. They get all the way, and Hell Week is not the beginning. That's well into it. And then when they break, they see who's going to get up and go. And so even in that extremely controlled, measured environment, they have very little predictability of success. And so when you hear the experts on all the hiring process, I do think that a lot of times they're way too far into the depth. And so when I talk about at what depth to ask the question,
Sure.
the idea that you're going to predict how the individual, even if they do excellent at the people analyzer, the get it, want it, have the capacity to do it, the reality is much more detailed. Certainly some acumen assessments are obvious, and certainly if there's a skill level needed for that position, that's obvious, and those are appropriate. But the idea that you're going to continue to run them through panels like a psychologist
Yeah.
or a psychiatrist, and you're going to pick the right person, that is snake oil. It's really the nicest way. I haven't seen any data that really plays out with success. So I think it is much more appropriate to, again, align the values, try to get an assessment on their dedication, their consistency, and their flexibility, which is important. And then certainly if you have a seat that requires, if it's a software position, if it's an accounting position, you need the acumen and you need them to prove their ability to do it.
Yeah.
But much past that, I think you're stretching. And so I do love the Working Genius, which is my favorite assessment I've seen. So I think that the way that works out, you can give a brief if you're wanting to see how the people play together. It's really, to me, a measurement of how long they will stay in a lane doing a certain type of task.
Yes.
And not necessarily an acumen. You may be excellent at an area of work that will not bring you joy, and you will get burnt out, and the employee will leave. And you won't understand why. They could have hit all the big macro level. So they bought into the business, they bought into your values, they bought into the purpose, they get along with the team, they do excellent work, and all of a sudden they're fed up and they're done. I do think that Lencioni's Working Genius is the best I've seen at truly saying this gives them energy, this is neutral, and this will drain them. And so maybe you can talk of, as you rolled that out, and I know you did an assessment yesterday with a team, how that plays out more so, because you put it against a disc, a Maxwell version of a disc, which is another very good one. But to me, I still like Working Genius a little better.
Yeah, and I'm a bit partial towards Working Genius myself. For those unfamiliar with Working Genius, it's the six types of Working Genius. It's a book by Patrick Lencioni. And in the six types, or the six types are, the first is wonder, the genius of wonder. Those are the people who are always naturally curious, asking the questions and trying to figure out, hey, why are things the way they are? The next genius is the genius of invention. And that is the person who responds to the person who comes up with the idea and says, well, I have a solution to that particular question. Then comes the third genius, the genius of discernment. And discernment then takes that idea and kind of uses some gut feel to say, is this a good idea? Is this the path we should potentially be on? If it is something that we should continue to pursue, the next genius, the genius of galvanization or galvanizing, comes into play. And that person then rallies the team to get them excited about this new thing that we want to do. And as soon as that happens, the genius of enablement comes in. Those are the people who want to help. They want to support. So this says, oh, we're doing something new. I can help. I've got a skill set. I want to be part of that. And then finally, the final genius is the genius of tenacity. And so it spells widget, W-I-D-G-E-T. And tenacity is all about getting it across the line. But if you look across those six geniuses, you take the first two, wonder and invention, and that is the stage of work called ideation. And that takes a lot of big picture thinking, a lot of going back and forth to answer the question, to match it with the solution. The next two, which are discernment and galvanizing, those are the stage of work of activation. That's taking the idea and transforming it into something we can act against. And then finally, the last two geniuses are the genius of enablement and tenacity, and that is the stage of work of implementation. And so you've got ideation, activation, and then implementation. The thing is, if you are naturally geared towards implementing things like I am, an ET, an enabler tenacity, but I'm spending all my time doing big picture strategy stuff, I get frustrated. And the reason is of those 6 geniuses, we all naturally have 2 that are our God-given talents. And we call those your working genius. So you have 2. Those are the things that you can do. That type of work that you're doing energizes you. You kind of lose track of time. You could do it all day, every day. It's just something that you're just naturally gifted at, and you want to continue to pursue that. Then you have 2 geniuses, what they call your working competencies. And those are things that, yeah, you're skilled in, you get a little bit of joy from them, but if you had to do them every single day, it would start to wear you out after time. And then there are 2 geniuses that are your working frustrations. And those are the things that drain you of energy. But what's interesting about the working genius is you can be skilled and talented in all 6 geniuses. So even though I'm a tenacity person, I can do some strategy work. But if I had to do nothing but strategy work, that would burn me out. And so working genius is a great quick assessment, takes about 10 minutes, and it helps people identify what are the things that bring them energy. And so to your point, if you've got a person who may be very, very skilled, but they're doing the wrong type of work day in and day out, they will become burnt out. More importantly, you may have a person who's in a role or a position who actually has the genius of something that you don't have. And if you put him into that role, he or she into that role, then they contribute much more greater. They feel that they're part of the team. They feel like they're pushing things forward. And it really starts to bring the cohesiveness of the team together. We wouldn't know any of that unless you did some sort of quick assessment like the working genius. And for me, it's been very easy to understand. It's been easy for people to take, and it's easy for people to get. It's not like Myers-Briggs where you got an ISTJ, you got these 16 different things that you're doing, or even DISC where you got 4 different profiles, but I could be a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this. Working Genius says, these are the 2 things that I'm really good at. These are 2 things that will start to drain me. These are 2 things I probably should avoid doing too much of. And I think it's a great assessment.
One, what you just described in that Myers-Briggs DISC and Working Genius is what I was talking about depth. And so you went from a micro, very detailed Myers-Briggs up to a DISC and then up to the Working Genius.
Yes.
What it also reflects is where you started the conversation is the tendency is for you to hire more tenacity people.
100% correct.
You get frustrated if they don't get it done on time, on target, as you like to say.
Yep.
But the reality is, who's coming up with an idea? And then who's discerning whether or not what we're doing with our tenacity is correct, given the situation. And so it is back to, again, the original discussion of you must be open and willing to work with people that have different views and different things to bring to the table. Otherwise, you risk a catastrophic failure and missing a blind spot, whatever you want to call it, that would have easily been seen had you put the team together, hired the right employees, been open to their suggestions and discussions. Understand they're going to frustrate you because Scott, we have a lot of IDs. So people coming up with invention and discernment. And so what Scott loves to point out is IDs will explain a way to solve a problem. Then they'll start discerning it. Before we're done, the next ID will jump in and go, well, what if we did this? And then they'll start this. And so we get in the ID loop. And Scott just wants a direction to enable us to move forward to take tenacity.
What are we going to implement? Let's make the decision so we can
Which is frustrating to both parties. And so again, it is a humble approach to leadership that I'm willing to be in a group that's going to frustrate me because I see the net result does not have to be perfect harmony and us all doing the same thing. The net result is actually the goal. And so that we've talked about it on several podcasts, the idea of putting that purpose up above the interaction between the people in the room. The same goes with your employees. If you don't clearly lay out those values and the purpose of their position and how that ties into the greater purpose, something that Scott has done a great job of breaking down, we call whyology. So, discover your why. We've spoken about it. Simon Sinek is great at it. But how do you break that down? And so if you can deconstruct that, talk with the employee, recompose it, show them how that builds up towards the overall vision of what we're trying to accomplish, I think their patience for diversity of thought and people different from them is a lot higher. If you leave them unaware of what we're trying to do. They don't see the purpose of even having a frustration with a fellow employee or with someone that's in the room with them trying to solve a problem. And so losing focus, losing what we're trying to accomplish risks destroying the diversity of thought. And I do see that as a pretty common problem. And I do think it is where the current, even if I could slide the political out of it, the other problem I see is diversity for diversity's sake.
Yeah.
If diversity doesn't have, and again, we're talking diversity of thought, so all the categories that are kind of more in the public sphere now, but also just what do you bring to the table? Are you an engineer, a military? Are you, more of a psychology and a thinker? The same examples of working genius. If we don't know what we're shooting for, then of course it's chaos. It's not disharmony seeking to innovate. It's just disharmony.
Mm-hmm.
And so you must lay out the purpose. You must and I do think that Gino Wickman did a great job of simplifying that with the GWC and the people analyzer.
Right.
We added to it our values and some things we changed, but it does give you a framework, which then can work into your work in genius, that I think filters out the obvious. And then you're left with a reasonable pool of, we'll see how it goes. Because my experience is, despite pay, despite how many times we interview, despite how certain we are someone's going to be great, no different than the military example. We don't know until they get in the job, until the stress comes up, you put the pressure on, then you figure out, are they actually going to survive? And so that moves a little past the right people. And so we've hired them now, and they're on board. What step did we miss? I feel like we missed one. And so, did we visit the seasonality of the job? So we talk about a higher level again.
Yeah.
Necessity to discuss where is the individual in their personal life, their business development, leadership development, knowledge of the industry versus what is ideal for the seat. And so that's one we've mentioned on the podcast, seasonality, but in this case, we're talking about with your crew during the hiring process. And so, Scott, give me a little bit of how you think that plays out as maybe that'd be the fourth kind of layer, fifth layer of.
Well, it's definitely a layer we've got to consider. And even some of the things you just mentioned just now brought to mind what we believe here at Helmwise, which is we don't believe in any one methodology or any one framework or any one tool or any one assessment. We believe that each of these things have their own strengths and weaknesses, and every organization is different. So we need to take all of those tools and put the right combination of tools together that map to that organization. But just like our fundamental question of asking the right question at the right time at the right depth, that mosaic may change over time as well. And we talked about whyology. So we're all very familiar, as you mentioned, with Simon Sinek and why, and everyone gets that. But then how do you activate it? Going back to working genius, that's at ideation. We know our why, right? But how do we activate the why? And then how do we implement the why? And that's sort of the decomposition of the why so that now people can get excited about it. We can then put them in the right place with their right geniuses and move the company forward. The seasonality piece, as you mentioned, is critically important. We've seen this so many times, is that where are the different components in their seasons? And you look at a business goes through seasons. It has a startup, it goes through a growth phase, it matures, and then potentially it starts to decline. That's a seasons that it goes through, just like planting a crop, right? It goes through different seasons and different stages. But as an individual, we go through different stages. Think about ourselves when we're first coming into the working environment. We don't know a whole lot. Usually we serve in an individual contributor role. Then we get a little bit into management, right? And then from there we get into more senior management and into the executive suite. And all along the way, our influence, both personally as well as the team and our effect on the team changes. It changes with each season. A new person to an organization is going to have a different season than a person who's been here for 5 to 10 years, right? Their influence, their knowledge of the industry, their knowledge of the team are going to be different. But then you also have, where are we individually in our stage of life, right? Am I just a single person coming out of college? Am I now just started a family, or am I an empty nester? And when you start layering all those things on top of one another to include the person, the company, and the overall business or industry, that's a crazy mosaic, and it constantly is changing, right? Who I was in my formative years in business, well, I had a family. So I had to get home for soccer practice and vacations and other things. Well, now I'm an empty nester. I could work all day, every day if I want to. That's a different season of life. What does the season for the business call for? What does that seat need? And how is it going to change over time? Because we may find the right person for that seat if the season is right. But as that person matures or as the company matures, we may need a different person. Or we may not even need that seat because the company has evolved. And seasonality is something, a tool that we have developed here at HelmWise that goes in and looks at these different dimensions. And it tries to map what is the ideal for what the company needs right now. And the people who are available to fill that need, where are they in their season, and will it be the right fit? Going back to Work and Genius, will we be putting them in a place where they're getting natural energy and drive, or are we going to burn them out, or because we put them in a place that seasonally they weren't ready for? And as captains, we've got to be willing to support them in their season as well, if there is indeed a seasonality gap.
So as employees, when we talk about our potential employees, an interviewee, you're coming in to try to get a job, you know, take these examples Scott and I have walked through and invert them into your seat. And so when you sit down with a leader and you're coming to do an interview, obviously they should be able to lay out their values. They should be able to lay out the purpose. They should be able to describe the seat. They should be able to describe how your talents and your skill set fit the seat or not. They should be able to describe to you the time commitments, the experience level they expect, what is ideal in that seat from the seasonality perspective. And if they can't articulate that, when you come in with a notepad, which is
that's a big one,
I see all the time. So if you're watching this and you need a job, please take a notepad. Take something to write on. It is a big no-no, at least in my world. But if they can't answer those questions for you, understand you're walking into more uncertainty getting the seat. And if they are super specific, again, if you're working in a drug development, drug trial, or you're developing a certain software, or you're an engineer building, you can get very specific. That's where the depth of the questioning can get very specific. But if you're in a general business, or even at a level where you have divisions, so if you're a large organization, have divisions that do those things, but you're working in HR, or you're working in a department that is kind of general management, and they can't lay those things out, or if they lay them out super specifically, you just need to be aware that one is assuming things will stay static, and the other one, you're walking into some unknown. It's going to be hard to define. So I think that's where, as an employee, the 30, 60, 90 comes in, and I think that you can ask the interviewer, if they don't have the answers and the interview structured like Scott and I have laid out, what is success at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Try to pin them down a little more on what the role needs to be, because they may not understand the things that we walked through.
Yeah,
but
exactly
you as going in to get a position at a company can ask them to lay out success, lay out what happens when the business changes. Those are questions that are certainly going to help you get a job. If you come into an interview and you start asking back about the seat, about 30, 60, 90 days out, about what happens when the business environment changes and revenue changes, what do they like to do with employees that don't necessarily have the wrong seat on the bus? The seat just may disappear. Certainly, I go back to the very specific example of drug trials. Well, what happens when it fails? Phase after phase. Does that mean everyone just loses their job? Often it does, and that's the reason they pay very good pay at most of those jobs, is you need to be prepared for hunting a new job. But be aware of that. Ask the questions back. Quiz the leadership or the person interviewing you, and one, it'll show them your interest. Two, the depth of knowledge and kind of breadth of what you're considering. And I think it'll give you a clearer picture of what you're walking into.
As you were going through that, one of the words I wrote down here was time, or 2 words, time horizon. And because you mentioned the 30, 60, 90. The fact that an organization has a 30, 60, 90 outlook, that says that they understand that things are going to change with time. And we, as captains and those who are bringing on members of our crew, we have to ensure that as time moves forward, the ship continues on its journey towards its North Star. And, with that comes something as simple as succession, right? How are we going to keep the leadership going forward? Those new members who are being brought in, are they the people who are now bringing in the foundational elements who could be a future steward, a future captain? But often we have a need. We put a person, define the seat, find a person, put them in the seat, but then it's as if it was supposed to automatically transform with the business. No, it's a purposeful, intentional thing. And quite often, businesses get themselves into trouble because they haven't planned for the succession of their crew. And we would find that in Daniel Pink's work when he talks about drive, about the need for individuals to grow with the company, right? So you have to offer those opportunities for the individual to grow, and that's because you're thinking beyond today and what they need to be, what the business is going to be. Looking at their geniuses again, right? Do I have the right opportunities for that individual to stay fulfilled and to continue to grow? This is all a captain focusing on their crew. And we've said that one of the key things of a captain is to care for the crew. And if you truly care for your crew, the things that we've been talking about will be important to you as a captain. It won't be something that you're just going to delegate down to HR or someone else. You're going to take an active interest as the captain of the ship to ensure that your crew, first of all, is being onboarded correctly, that they're ready for the journey, that we can continue to develop them. And if necessary, and they're not the right fit, then we can let them off at the next port. But that all is the captain's responsibility. So this session here, we've been talking about the crew matches to the captain and that true ownership of not only the direction of the ship, but the people who are on it.
I'll continue to play the job seeker role. And so again, when you're in that process and you interview and you know there's weaknesses or expectations, and you should anticipate that's always the case, even if you bring a great resume and history to the table, what is the development plan, to your point?
Yep.
What is the actual process that's laid out to grow yourself in the skills needed for that job, but also bring to the table one thing that we don't see that is an easy differentiator looking for a job. Walk through to the potential employer what you're going to do to personally grow yourself. And so
personal growth.
If you want to quickly differentiate between other potential job seekers, talking about hey, what can I do in my time? What skills can I pick up in addition to what the company should be doing and caring, as Scott spoke about? But what can you do to personally grow? How much can you personally read? Can you take sessions? We are in a time today where there's literally almost no topic you cannot go learn. And you can learn it through multiple sources. So if you don't like one person's way they teach it or lecture it, you can find another. You can find an app for it. There's really no excuse for not getting at least a base level understanding of about any topic that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
You may not learn how to truly, deploy it in the work environment until you get formal training. But the idea that you're going to walk in even between getting the interview to you're hired and not prepare yourself before the starting day seems odd as a leader to see with an employee, and an easy thing when you're a job seeker to distinguish yourself and differentiate is to talk about, hey, what can I do to be prepared for day one? What can I be doing to succeed at the 30, 60, 90? And then what are you going to provide, employer, to also supplement that and to help me grow? So I think development is a big part. I think that it is become a one-way street. So I'll get a little controversial, which I know will fire you up on that side. We have forgotten that you control your destiny, and yes, the employer should do that. We have voiced that opinion pretty adamantly. They should care about the employees. They should, but they're going to fail, and sometimes it's not a failure to care. Sometimes it's distraction. Sometimes you must meet in the middle, and you must be willing to develop yourself, not just for the company. So don't think that's a company line. It's still your career and your resume and your ability to pay for your family and advance what you're doing. And so it's not just that's what leadership says because it's good. No, who is actual beneficiary of you bettering yourself?
That's right. That's right.
Yes, the business gets it, but you get to take it with you. And even if the business disappears, you are now more capable, more educated, a better hire for someone else should that be the case and it not work out.
Yeah, there was, so many things that came to mind as you were going through that piece. First of all was mindset. We're big fans of Carol Dweck as well. Her book Mindset, Growth Mindset.
Yep.
That person you just spoke about has a growth mindset. They're going to come in and say, look, what I have right now may be good for right now, right? But I have to continue to grow. And with that, part of that goes into that personal growth. We've done a session here just locally around John Maxwell's book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. And it's all about coming up with a personal growth plan. And how are you going to grow yourself, both from a personal awareness perspective, but also in skills and talents and abilities and flexibility and emotional intelligence and all those other things. But I also think that you mentioned about in today's environment, there is no shortage of sources for information. But one of the things that I would caution everyone is that don't take what you read to be the gospel, right? Seek other things. We talked about diversity earlier, diversity of thought. Seek other sources. And then, hey, if all those sources are saying essentially the same thing, then you have a higher level of confidence that that information is accurate. But if you go in with just a particular source, in today's world with AI and other things, I don't know if that information necessarily can be counted upon as being accurate by itself. And we've mentioned already that a lot of different assessments that I've analyzed. I've also analyzed a lot of different frameworks because what I try to do is find the commonality. What is the common thread that connects all of these things? Because if all these different authors are coming up with all these great ideas and great frameworks and great methodologies, but there is one core thread through all of them, I can feel sure that that common thread is important. And so at Helmwise, what we try to do is take a very vast bit or volume of knowledge and distill it down to its principles and patterns. That's what we're all about. That's why we're not an advocate for any one thing. We are agnostic. We want the best thing that's going to work for that company. And it may be different for every single company, but we would never know that unless we actually have the right tools in the toolbox. And so the personal growth is right along that, right? We've got to ensure that we'll continue to add the tools to our tool belt as individuals so that we can grow with the organization and help it in its next stage of the journey. So very important things there.
Growth plan you brought up for the people that sit on the other side of the Lencioni's working genius, the wonderment, certainly the invention. I think that your second point on not getting too wed or certain that what you've gone down the path of is the answer, just keep moving forward. And so Carol Dweck's point is the joy is actually found in self-improvement. And so it may seem completely useless to your job, but keep learning, keep moving forward, just like leaders who want to get the answer. They want to fix the business and put it on a plateau and it just be downhill. Employees do the same thing, and we do it personally the same thing as well. We got a new certification or we figured something out and we're done. We're just going to sit on there in a static state. And so that never works. So there's some good discussion. We've talked about the peaks and valleys and kind of the flow of life, of sound waves, the ocean waves, heartbeat. None of those are good when they go flat.
No.
And so generally you're dead, and you might enjoy a little bit of calm motion every once in a while, but that is certainly the exception and the rare unicorn. So
what was that saying that something about the right track?
Oh, yes.
Roy Rogers, I think, said it.
Will Rogers.
Will Rogers
said, even if you're on the right track and you don't move, you'll get run over.
There you go.
So the train's still going to run you over when you get there and sit. And so you must move, must grow. And I think if you really adopt that growth mindset, you may be learning about something in climate, next thing about code, software and AI, and then you may be over in math or economics. It may be something to do with psychology or HR. All those things continue to expand your neuroplasticity, which is a nerdy term, but your ability to learn new things and prepare for the unknown. And so when you get to monovision, too sold on the right thing at the right place and not think about the depth, are you getting too far down in, unless, again, it is called for, which on occasion it is. Specialties are not terrible, but they are specialties, which means they're extremely narrow. And so if that narrow niche ends up gone, what are you going to do? Yeah. And so it may be great to be there, and it may be a great career and great money, but always keep learning things that are outside of that. So if and when, because it will eventually pivot off, all great things come to an end is certainly true, and they cycle back. So, maybe you'll get to wear your 80s jeans again like they have the last few years. But, the reality is it's going to change.
So, back to the 70s.
Well, it moves into kind of the last, I think, topic you wanted to cover of they're going to change. Personal growth, certainly a leader has a responsibility. The organization should have clarity. They should be able to lay that out, should be able to articulate what they want in the seat, should be able to articulate kind of where you are and the chasm between those two. How are we going to cross that? Again, through personal development, organized development, 30, 60, 90s, accountability. So how do I know about it? But really, law of the harvest is one that has been around. It comes from a religious term, but it's 4,000 years old. It certainly is across many different religions, but certainly comes from a biblical Jewish Hebrew background. But give us a little bit on that, because I think that everyone intuitively knows that it comes, as a direct analogy to harvesting crops and how it works in the field, but how that plays out in your career, in your personal relationships, and in your actual business if you are the leader in that seat, even though I've taken kind of the, employee job seeker seat in this discussion.
Certainly. Well, we've been talking about growth, and so the law of the harvest actually is a natural segue into ending this particular podcast. And, the law of the harvest, to me, goes back to what we talked about as Helmwise, taking a lot of information in and trying to find the principles and patterns. Law of the harvest are one of those principles and patterns. And the first law of the harvest is you reap what you sow, right? So if you are not putting forth the effort, the energy to properly select your crew members, you're going to reap the fact that you didn't do that, right? Now, if you did,
you've heard that. I'll jump in there. Sorry, but everyone knows this, and I had a pastor that's a very straightforward, not a very bashful one, that pointed out on this sowing. You all heard of sowing and reaping. Of course, everyone's heard that term. But the reality is, his comment was, if you don't have good friends, and certainly I think Jordan Peterson follows this on some of the psychology side as well, if you don't have good friends, you don't have good relationships, if no one wants to spend time around you, more than likely you need to get in front of the mirror and show some humility, because what are you sowing out into the other people? And so I work on this even with my children. I don't like how these kids, and they're young enough, the youngest is young enough to still be on the playground. And so, I don't necessarily like the way this kid is playing, or another kid comes and we split off. And I said, well, do you play with the kids and invite other kids in and make the group more broad and be willing to change the game? And do you participate with a good attitude if 2 friends out of 3 want to do something else? Because if you don't, and they respond the same way when you want to change, you sowed that into a relationship. And so I do want to, we're talking business, but this is relationships as well. What atmosphere have you created? What have you deposited into the credit account in order to get it back? And so, that's, again, development, but I sidetracked you a little bit. So
no, actually,
when we sow it, what's the next one?
Yeah, you went right into it, because what I was going to say is you sow in kind. Right. If you are sowing the right qualities, then you will reap the right qualities. It's not just that if you don't sow, you don't reap. But when you do sow, you've got to sow in the right kind. Your example of your young daughters was a great one, right? If you're not doing the right things, how do you expect to reap the right things? So you got that. It's also the fact that we talked about it through seasonality. You always reap in a different season. You can't sow right now and then automatically harvest. It has to grow. So you've got to actually take that time aspect of things that we talked about earlier and sow, and then you're going to reap a little bit later. So you're going to invest in your crew, and you're going to reap that investment later. You can't expect an instantaneous reaping or harvesting. You just can't do that. But in today's world, that's what we want, right? We don't have what we want. We're just going to swipe right, right? Let me get something different. That's not in accordance with the law of the harvest. If you truly are a business captain, you truly are caring for your crew, you're going to sow knowing that you're going to reap in a different season.
Well, and that's a maturity thing. And so, even if you take it out of the current context of, social media certainly allowing you to see a lot of behavioral problem with children on the ability to swipe and to change. They don't even have to watch commercials. We don't have to watch a show we don't like. We just swipe it over. But, that is a lack of maturity. When you're teaching a 2-year-old to say please and thank you, they get an instantaneous reward, just like training your pet with treats. Well, that's good and a great way when they're young,
right,
to teach them the right behaviors. But that is not, to your point early on, time. That does not take into account when is the appropriate time to expect to reap that. And so you can't sow trust and expect someone that afternoon to trust you.
Exactly.
That's
right.
immature, and it's not a right way to view it. And so we confuse that. Certainly, social media, the immediacy of like right now, and the ability to get it, which is great convenience. So I'm not knocking that, but you must consider whether that is reality of how actual relationships, actual careers, and actual knowledge, not actually just info. Knowledge, which is truly understanding the info, how and when to apply it. You don't acquire that by watching one video. You acquire that by watching lots and lots. You put it into writing, you put a practice into it, you actually go practice it.
Right.
Then you start having knowledge. And so it's important to distinguish, to your point, the season at which you should expect to get a return on that.
Get a return, exactly right.
So
right.
What must you do in between? So I guess I'll tell you another hint, but there's a couple of rules kind of on how much you sow and what you have to do once you've sown it. So if we're back to crops.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to fertilize it, right? You got to water it. You've got to care for your crop that you have sown.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to reap a harvest.
And if you think to something as simple as corn, because that's easy to see and everyone sees it in different places, if you didn't sow seed in a part of the field, or if you didn't sow more than 2 acres, you're not getting more than 2 acres of corn.
Right.
And so again, it's a very, I think, easy
reaping in proportion
metaphor of you're going to reap the amount that you sow. And yes, that amount will multiply, which is a great part about it. One kernel of corn obviously makes lots of kernels, but you're still not going to be able to get more than 2 acres. And so you must still put the time and the effort to understand there is a proportion to it. And this is not excluding the rare occasion where something great happens, but consistently.
But along with that proportionality comes that you also reap more than what you sow. You mentioned the fact that you get more kernels of corn from the byproduct than you did when you initially had sown it. And I think it's a great way of thinking about the sort of multiplication effect inside of a company, right? If you are indeed sowing gratitude, right? Though the fact that you're sowing gratitude, others are going to sow that gratitude with others, and it's going to multiply, it's going to expand. But similarly, if you're sowing bad will, if you're showing distrust, then others are going to pass that on to others. And so the multiplication effect, or the expansion of what you're sowing, is also important to realize that you're always going to reap more than what you sow, good or bad, within a business.
Well, and maintenance of the crop, as you mentioned too. So, it is easy, and certainly a downfall of mine, to be blunt, of, I have done the things, I'm willing to do the things. It is the daily maintenance of relationships, for instance. So I'm very good if you want to come to me and ask for help and want to have a discussion. That's a natural thing I enjoy doing. Going out and seeking to tend the flock is a weakness of mine personally. And a lot of that is driven out of probably a little more type A, because I'd rather close my door and go to work. So it's not that I'm not available because I'm out wanting to golf. I enjoy golf, but I like working. And I like learning to apply things. But the reality is, if you're not out tending what you planted and what you have sown, don't expect to get a full return either. So even if you're going to multiply, you're not going to get the same multiplying effect. So you could be aware of those first few law kind of rules and principles, but if you don't tend it, so talk a little bit about tending it. Where have you seen that be successful and negative? I guess.
Well, I found that those who truly spend time trying to connect with their crew are most successful. I mentioned this yesterday in the engagement I was doing, that you always need to come away with some level of connection with each member of your crew every time you interact with them. Find out something about their family, their occupation, their recreation, or their dreams. And so that part of tending to your crop, the fertilization, showing them that they care, making that connection, giving them the water, ensuring they're getting the nutrients when you see them start to wither a little bit, right? You don't let it just die on the vine. No, you try to bring it back to life. And so that constant caring for the crop is to me where the success comes in. And in this case, just investing in your people continuously. But one thing that also is part of the law of the harvest, we've seen this through Angela Duckworth's work and her book Grit. You got to persevere, right? You got to stick with it, right? You're going to have some days where rain is hard to come by. You're going to have some days where you have nothing but rain, right? And it's tough to do some of the things you need to do in the field. Same thing with your crew, right? You've got to persevere through those different aspects in order to reap the harvest on the opposite side.
I had dinner last night with a CEO of the U.S. version of a dairy co-op that's based out of Denmark, and he made a comment. Although that's an $11 billion company owned by farmers in Europe, that most of those farmers are one, maybe two bad seasons away from being broke, and that's the reality of actually living off of farming. And so it doesn't take long, and you must persevere through those bad seasons, but you must always be out there tending to your flock, tending to your crops, working on it. And then even if it goes south, what can you preserve and can you pivot? And again, that's where you need a lot of different thoughts to take it back. But it was just interesting to hear that, the families that own the dairies, that own a company that large, they're still very much dependent on each season's weather, the productivity. Certainly that gets more complex into international global affairs, driving price of commodities. But, in reality, they live a tenuous life. And so his point, which certainly I've seen, if you have a chance to know some farmers that have been successful over generations, they have a lot of wisdom to share because they've seen how this investment, this time, this effort, the amount they can predict versus what they can't control. And so they put in the effort every day and they prepare for the worst.
Right. So let's close it on kind of the final piece of law of the harvest, and that is the fact that you can't reap a past harvest, right? So the good news about everything we've talked about today is that if you're not doing those things, if you aren't caring for your crew, if you're not sowing the right capabilities or the right talents or even the right culture, you can start today with a new crop.
Yep.
And so that part of it gives me both hope and optimism about anything that we do. The fact that we make a poor decision, well, we can now make a better decision. Jocko Willink in his great little podcast clip, Good, or his little snippet out there on YouTube, Good, hey, something bad happened. Good. It gives me an opportunity to do something different next time, or to learn from it, or to take a different approach. And so I think that last law of the harvest, which says you cannot reap past harvests, is just a great thing to end on, because it means just keep moving forward.
Yeah, and it's a direct analogy or metaphor for what we're talking about, wanting to be on that plateau. We've sown it, we've done it, we're going to live off of it. You're going to live off of it for that season. And then past that, you're not going to live off past harvest. You must keep going, and I think that's where the Carol Dweck growth mindset, you're going to go back, you're going to re-sow and go through the hard time again, keep growing, even if it's not as good as Scott and his tenacity side would put a full growth plan. But if you're always growing and improving and bettering yourself and taking advantage of, again, as the employee, all the opportunities the business has, view it as it's something you get to take with you. And I think there's been a bad twist on that of the company just expects me to do stuff. Well, you actually get to keep it. Education and what you've learned and your skill set, they're yours. And so even if the company does turn out to be a bad company, you still get to take it with you, and it still goes in your resume. And so keep growing. Don't think you're going to live off the past. Understand that, yes, you get your plateaus. You do get to rest for a moment, but that moment should make you uncomfortable, and you should go right back at it again.
Yep, absolutely. So let's wrap it there. I want to thank everyone for coming back and listening to the Powerhouse Perspective. Chandler, safe travels. And everyone out there in podcast land, we will see you next time. Cheers.
Thank you.